Ryloth Rising, the Twi'lek Legacy. Chapter 1, The Winds of Ryloth. There is a place at the edge of the outer rim where the light never moves. One face is always turned to the sun, scorched and radiant, a realm of unrelenting heat and searing light. The other lies buried in endless night, a cradle of cold that swallows life whole. And in between, thin as a breath and narrow as a whisper, is a sliver of twilight, caught forever in the gloaming. This is Ryloth, homeworld of the Twi'leks, a planet as fierce and unforgiving as it is hauntingly beautiful. To survive here is to bend, to endure, to adapt. Ryloth does not offer welcome, it demands resilience. The planet's tidally locked nature dictates its every breath. Unlike most worlds that spin in rhythmic rotation, Ryloth's rotation matches its orbital period around its sun, Ryloth Prime. As a result, one hemisphere is perpetually exposed to the brutal, unblinking glare of the sun, the bright lands, while the opposite hemisphere languishes in the black abyss of the frozen wastes. There are no true days or nights, no seasons to speak of. The line between life and death is drawn with solar fire and ice. Only the narrow region between the extremes, known as the Twilight Belt, supports a semblance of balance. Here, the sun hovers eternally low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows and copper-orange hues over jagged cliffs and sun-baked mesas. The sky never darkens completely, nor does it brighten, always caught in a dusky stillness. Ryloth's atmosphere, thin and dry, compounds the harshness. Winds scream across the surface at tremendous speeds, funneled by the planet's peculiar geography and temperature gradients. These atmospheric currents are not mere breezes. They are violent, scouring torrents capable of stripping flesh from bone and reshaping the very land itself. Dust storms can last for weeks, their red haze seeping into everything, coating skin, lungs, and soul. The Twi'leks call them Jansari, or the angry breath, and they are a fact of life. Children are taught early to recognize their approach, not by sight, for the horizon is deceptive, but by the subtle pressure drop and the taste of iron on the wind. Despite its savagery, Ryloth is alive. Life has carved niches in unexpected places. In the bright lands, certain cacti-like flora, gnarled and bleached, thrust through baked soil, storing moisture in resinous bulbs beneath the surface. Some species have evolved wax-coated leaves or reflective surfaces to endure the relentless solar radiation. There are insects that burrow deeply, only emerging once every few standard months when conditions allow. Others have symbiotic relationships with the heat itself, thriving in thermal vents that spew gases from deep within Ryloth's crust. It is not life as most understand it. It is life on the edge of extinction, clawing at the margins. In the frozen wastes, the story is no less dramatic. Here, temperatures plunge beyond survivability. The terrain is jagged and alien, with ice structures sculpted by millennia of cold winds. Frozen geysers mark ancient volcanic channels, and methane lakes sit still beneath fragile crusts of rime. There is little surface movement here. Most known species either hibernate within the ice or survive as microbial colonies deep in thermal fissures. It is in this region that some of Ryloth's oldest myths place the Tyranna, a now extinct predator that hunted by sound, its sonar cries echoing like whispers through frost-choked canyons. Yet it is the Twilight Belt that defines Ryloth's soul. Here, the balance between light and darkness gives rise to the only ecosystems capable of sustaining sentient life. And it is here that the Twi'leks built their civilization, not upon the surface, but beneath it. Towering limestone cliffs, split by deep gorges and ancient lava tubes, conceal vast subterranean cities and networks. The largest of these, Kalayun, Lesu, Nabit, and Ruhak, are carved into the very bones of the planet, blending seamlessly with the terrain. From a distance, they appear as part of the cliffside, their entrances hidden in shadow, their windows nothing more than dark pockmarks on the rock. These underground settlements were not born from artistic vision or romantic inclination. They were a necessity. Exposure to the surface elements was a death sentence. Only by moving underground could the Twi'leks shield themselves from the Jansari, from solar radiation, from bone-freezing wind. Generations of architects learned to design with wind tunnels and air pockets in mind, crafting spiraling vents and geothermal chambers that circulated heat and moisture. Natural rock formations became walls, ceilings, homes. Water was harvested from condensation trapped between layers of basalt. Light was collected by solar crystals and redirected through fibered lattice networks. Nothing was wasted. Everything was part of the balance. Clan territories marked these cities, each with its own sigil etched into the walls, its own colors and ceremonial winds. Twi'lek society was traditionally divided along clan lines, with each clan staking a claim to a section of the underground labyrinth. Clans were more than families. They were political entities, spiritual leaders, and survival units all at once. In Turklan, rivalries were common, but open warfare was rare. Ryloth could not afford to lose its own children to civil strife. Diplomacy, barter, and alliance were more common, and decisions were often made by councils of elders who interpreted the will of the planet itself through centuries-old customs. Above ground, the terrain was both magnificent and lethal. Massive stone arches towered over crimson plains. Jagged plateaus loomed like sentinels, their shadows stretching endlessly. Fissures carved by ancient lava flows revealed subterranean glowworm colonies that pulsed with bioluminescent life, casting eerie hues across the interior walls. There were hunting trails worn by generations of Twi'leks who stalked the native fauna. Creatures like the lur, a swift desert runner that bled clear fluid, or the Gron, a six-legged insectivore with iridescent carapace armor. The Twilight Belt was where Twi'leks communed with the land, offered sacrifice to wind spirits, and sang to the rising thermals that danced at the edge of the abyss. The weather itself could turn on a whim. Though the sun never moved from its place in the sky, the air could shift without warning. The Varric winds came screaming from the frozen wastes, slicing through the crevices and moaning like ghosts. Meanwhile, heated updrafts from the bright lands would warp the air into mirages and shimmering illusions. This constant dance between heat and cold, between drought and frost, gave rise to a people who understood impermanence. Twi'leks did not trust stillness. They knew that the land beneath their feet could change at any time, and so they learned to walk lightly and carry memory in stories, not stone. Ryloth's ecosystem was a patchwork of adaptive marvels. Fungal spores that lay dormant for years would erupt in phosphorescent blooms after rare thermal rains. Cloud formations, driven by competing thermal zones, formed unpredictable weather cells. Electrical storms crackled in the upper atmosphere, a natural ballet of color and danger. In remote areas, crystalline growths known as sunspires reflected solar rays like focused lenses, searing lines into the desert where even bacteria dared not grow. Twi'lek explorers mapped these places with reverence and fear, inscribing their records in cave paintings, etched into hidden corners only accessible through narrow tunnels or sacred descents. Over the centuries, as off-world contact increased, colonists and opportunists came to Ryloth seeking spice, minerals, or the beauty of its exotic inhabitants. They built surface settlements, clumsy and arrogant, that collapsed under the weight of the planet's wrath. Twi'leks watched them fail and vanish, their metal ruins now half buried in wind-blown dunes. The few that survived learned quickly to listen, not with instruments, but with instinct. Ryloth did not tolerate the careless. It demanded a kind of reverence, a respect earned through hardship and centuries of listening to the stone. Even today, in the age of starships and hyperlanes, Ryloth remains distant, unknowable. It is a world that cannot be terraformed, cannot be tamed. The galaxy's great powers have tried, first the Hutts, then the Empire, and even the New Republic, but each time, Ryloth reminds them of its truth. It is not a world to be possessed. It is a crucible that tempers those who call it home. The Twi'leks, bound to their world by blood and breath, know this. They do not seek to conquer the stars. They carry Ryloth within them, a silent understanding, a fire behind the eyes, a memory of winds that once howled through their ancestral bones. To understand the Twi'leks is to begin here, in the Twilight, where every step is shaped by stone and shadow, where survival is an act of defiance and grace, where the winds speak in riddles, and only those who listen may find peace. Chapter 2: The Lekku and the Legacy. Among all the sentient beings of the galaxy, few are as visually distinctive as the Twi'leks, and none more so than through the graceful drape of their Lekku. These long, sinuous head tails, 2 in number, extending from the skull's crown and trailing down behind the shoulders, are more than mere appendages. They are the soul of Twi'lek identity, both biological and cultural, a nexus where form, function, and history converge. To the outsider, Lekku may seem ornamental, even exotic, but to the Twi'leks, they are sacred conduits of memory, emotion, and expression. It is no exaggeration to say that a Twi'lek's entire life can be read through the subtle flick of a lek, the gentle twitch of a tail tip, or the way they rest in stillness when words are insufficient. Biologically, Lekku are complex neurological structures, highly sensitive and partially autonomous. Internally, They are lined with an intricate lattice of nerve bundles, pressure sensors, and fluid channels that regulate temperature and electrochemical signals. These structures are intimately connected to the brain's language centers and limbic system, making the Lekku both a sensory organ and an expressive limb. Damage to them, especially severance, can result in loss of cognitive function, memory disruption, or in rare cases, complete neural collapse. As such, Twi'leks are fiercely protective of their Lekku, and even the gentlest touch from an outsider can be interpreted as an act of intrusion or dominance. For this reason, Lekku are never grabbed or restrained in Twi'lek tradition unless as part of a deeply intimate bond or ritual submission, both of which are layered with complex meaning. The evolutionary purpose of Lekku has been long debated by xenobiologists. Some argue they developed as a heat regulation mechanism, channeling excess body temperature away from the skull in Ryloth's punishing climates. Others see their purpose as communication-based, serving as visual markers in low-light subterranean environments. There is also strong evidence that Lekku enhance spatial awareness, acting as organic antennae that process microvibrations in the air. For Twi'leks moving through the tight rock corridors of Canon or the echoing tunnels of Lekku, this gives them a sixth sense, an ability to feel a room's shape and the emotional state of others within it. Lekku also subtly respond to ambient sound, posture, and nearby movement, allowing Twi'leks to remain deeply attuned to their surroundings, often in ways they themselves are not consciously aware of. But the biology of Lekku is only the beginning. What truly defines them is their place in Twi'lek culture, a role so profound it transcends species boundaries. Lekku are the cornerstone of Twi'leki, the native language of Ryloth, which blends vocalized speech with an elaborate system of head-tail movement. A simple sentence may be spoken with the mouth, but its meaning is shaped, modified, or completely altered by the accompanying Lekku signals. A raised tone may indicate anger or joy depending on the tail's curl. A flick to the right may soften a challenge into a jest, while a loop around the shoulders can turn a compliment into a proposition. Fluent speakers of Twi'leki can conduct entire conversations silently, with Lekku alone, speaking through rhythm, pressure, angle, and tempo. It is a language of nuance and proximity, intimate and ephemeral, unreadable to outsiders unless trained from birth. This dual-layered communication gives Twi'leks an immense advantage in diplomacy and espionage, and many have used it to their benefit as merchants, emissaries, or informants. However, it also makes them painfully vulnerable to exploitation. Off-world slavers and hut overseers long understood that controlling a Twi'lek meant controlling their Lekku. By forcing suppression collars or constraining the tails behind the back, captors could mute their prisoners' most instinctive form of resistance. In some dark corners of the galaxy, Lekku mutilation became a tool of dehumanization, one that robbed the victim not only of pride but of selfhood. Among Twi'leks, such acts are not seen merely as torture, but as a desecration akin to spiritual death. Beauty, too, is bound to the Lekku. Twi'lek aesthetic ideals vary by clan and region, but the length, shape, and movement of the head-tails have always played a central role in perceptions of grace and status. In the Brightwind clans of Canon, Lekku that taper evenly and reach past the waist are seen as a symbol of maturity and balance, while the Stoneweave clan of the Ruhak Caverns values thicker tails with distinct ridges, associating them with physical strength and virility. Twi'lek children are often adorned with beads and colored silk ribbons wrapped gently around their Lekku during rites of passage, each color marking an age, a virtue, or a clan's favor. As they grow, these decorations evolve, some becoming permanent tattoos or bioluminescent inks that shimmer softly in the dim corridors of home. In this way, a Twi'lek's Lekku becomes a living scroll of their life, a record of devotion, mourning, achievement, and transformation. Rituals surrounding the Lekku are numerous and deeply held. In the ancient windborne ceremonies of the Twilight Belt, dancers perform silent blessings where only their head-tails move, swaying like fronds in an invisible current, their patterns mimicking the shifting air of Ryloth's high canyons. In funerary rites, the Lekku are wrapped in silver thread and bowed forward over the chest, symbolizing the return of memory to the earth. To the ancestral shamans, the Lekku are not just appendages, but vessels for the Twi'leks, a metaphysical echo that carries the individual's essence beyond death. Some clans believe that after passing, the last dream of the dead is recorded in the final posture of the Lekku. It is for this reason that they are handled with reverence, positioned carefully before burial or entombment. The centrality of the Lekku to Twi'lek hierarchy cannot be overstated. In the subterranean cities, leadership has long been associated with the ability to command silence, an art honed through masterful control of Lekku expression. The High Speakers of Calayun are renowned for delivering entire speeches in Twi'leki alone, with no sound beyond the whisper of air and the movement of their tails. These performances, often held in darkness or by torchlight, are meant to test both the clarity of the orator and the attentiveness of the audience. To misunderstand is to risk dishonor. To follow every motion precisely is a sign of loyalty and enlightenment. This tradition of silent governance has preserved diplomatic protocols even in times of occupation, allowing messages of resistance and unity to pass undetected under the watchful eyes of foreign rulers. In familial structures, Lekku also play a protective role. Newborns, whose tails are soft and undeveloped, often rest with them curled against the heartbeat of their mother or father, forming a tactile bond that lasts for life. Among bonded pairs, whether romantic or fraternal, gentle entwining of Lekku is a gesture of trust, vulnerability, and shared thought. These bonds are not limited by distance. Many Twi'leks claim they can sense the mood or danger faced by their bond partner through subtle tremors in the air, a phenomenon some off-world scholars dismiss as myth, but which has persisted in oral traditions for generations. During times of mourning, it is common for family members to braid their Lekku together for several days in quiet vigil, creating a tactile memorial that words cannot reach. Yet not all Twi'leks conform to these ideals. In the outer clans, far from the centers of power, some subgroups have developed alternative relationships with their Lekku. The caveborn of Rannoch Gorge, for example, practice ritual scarring as a symbol of hardship endured. Each scar, etched with volcanic glass, marks a personal trial or an enemy defeated. Their Lekku, far from being pristine, are maps of suffering and strength. In contrast, the sea wind nomads along the alkaline lakes of the western Twilight belt are known for their Lekku dances, fluid movements used to tell stories of migration, storm cycles, and the language of birds. Even Twi'leks raised off-world and diaspora communities retain their connection, though often altered. Many off-world Twi'leks have adopted metal sheaths or prosthetic decorations for their Lekku, both as cultural preservation and resistance to the homogenizing gaze of the core worlds. The galactic perception of Twi'leks has always been filtered through the lens of the Lekku, unfortunately, often objectified or misunderstood. In many sectors, Twi'leks are reduced to their physical grace, exploited for entertainment or servitude, their head-tails fetishized and commodified. The tragedy lies not only in the injustice, but in the erasure of what the Lekku truly represent. For the Twi'leks, they are not symbols of submission or pleasure. They are sacred instruments of identity. They remember what the voice forgets. They hold silence like a weapon and a bomb. Even among the Jedi, the Lekku retain their mystique. Twi'lek Force sensitives, though rare, developed unique techniques that incorporated Lekku into lightsaber combat and meditative focus. Jedi such as Aayla Secura adapted her center of balance through Lekku motion, reading emotional fields in crowds or sensing lies through the flicker of air around her tails. Within the Jedi archives, there are treatises on Lekku sensitivity written by Master Lon Tyr, a Twi'lek historian who argued that Lekku could perceive subtle force currents in a way similar to Miraluka sight, though through vibration and atmosphere rather than light. The legacy of the Lekku is, in the end, inseparable from the legacy of Ryloth itself. Like the planet, they exist in tension, fluid yet disciplined, elegant yet vital. They carry pain and pride, communication and concealment. They whisper histories too old for the stars and songs older than Republic maps. And through them, the Twi'leks speak a truth all their own. That language is more than words, and identity is not given. It is remembered, movement by movement, breath by breath. Chapter 3. Clans, Castes, and the Calayun Way. Beneath the jagged cliffs and shadowed canyons of Ryloth's Twilight belt lies a civilization, shaped not by conquest or colonization, but by resilience and interwoven legacy. At the heart of this civilization is the clan, more than a family, more than a faction. It is an identity, a lineage, and a structure of belonging that has defined Twi'lek society for millennia. Clan life governs everything from marriage rites and trade disputes to the color of mourning robes and the names given at birth. It is not merely a matter of blood, but of duty, memory, and loyalty to ancient truths. Nowhere is this more evident than in the subterranean cities of Calayun and Lessu, twin jewels of the underworld carved from the living rock. where clan banners flutter in silence and the air is thick with incense, secrets, and law. Calyun, the oldest and most influential of Ryloth's underground settlements, is a place of labyrinthine beauty. Hewn into the face of a limestone mountain and descending deep into its core, the city is an architectural marvel shaped by both natural forces and generations of deliberate crafting. At its uppermost reaches, sun-filtering crystals embedded into stone shafts catch the dim eternal twilight from the world above, refracting it into muted gold and lavender hues that glow across the grand plaza of the council ring. This is the ceremonial heart of Calyun, and here the clans convene, not in open debate or show of arms, but in slow deliberations whispered in the folds of headtails and carried through the corridors by the rhythm of shared breath. The city is not static, it grows with the needs of the clans, its tunnels extended by minor priests trained in both engineering and ritual, its vaults consecrated through rites passed down from those who carved the first sanctuaries. Within Calyun, and in other cities such as Lekku and Ruhak, Twi'lek society is structured by a complex and interdependent system of castes and clans. While each city may have its own local traditions, the broader system has endured across Ryloth for centuries, binding the people together through shared purpose and expectation. At the apex are the ruling clans, known as the Askerdari, the lineages of the voice. These clans are responsible for governance, diplomacy, and historical preservation. They keep the archives of bloodlines and decisions, and their members often serve as mediators between rival families. The most senior among them hold the title of head clan elder, a position not given by birthright alone, but by decades of service, insight, and consensus among allied families. These elders are the custodians of the Lexithar, the unwritten code of clan law that defines justice in Twi'lek society. They rarely speak in public, and when they do, it is said their words must be answered with action or silence, never argument. Beneath the Askerdari are the Nathvari, or the Maker's Line. These are the artisans, engineers, and crafters, the lifeblood of the cities who keep the infrastructure breathing and the traditions alive. Among them are the tunnel architects, the crystal shapers, the linguists who preserve Twi'leki in its oldest forms. They form the spine of Calyun, respected for their skill but seldom elevated to political roles. It is they who construct the chambers of mourning, who inscribe the clan names in molten silver across memorial walls, and who maintain the great water gears that filter the subterranean lakes feeding the city. Next are the Varnkavari, the line of shields. This caste includes defenders, scouts, and border watchers, Twi'leks who patrol the harsh regions between clan settlements and ensure safe passage through the shifting caverns and hidden paths. Though not warriors in the martial tradition of other cultures, they are disciplined and deeply respected. Trained from adolescence to navigate by echo and vibration, to interpret air currents like messages from the ancestors. Many among them have facial scarring or ceremonial piercings earned through survival trials in the Bright Lands. They serve the clans with quiet devotion, their authority recognized not through speech but through presence. Then come the Tharizen, the casteless or nomadic line. Not every Twi'lek is born into a recognized clan, and not every family retains its standing through the ages. These individuals live at the margins of society, not shunned but not embraced. Many work as surface traders or serve in less formal roles within the cities. Some choose to adopt the sigils of fallen clans, bearing them in defiance. Others form loose collectives bound by shared exile. The Tharizen are both a cautionary tale and a symbol of reinvention. It is from their ranks that some of the greatest reformers and revolutionaries have emerged, bearing no allegiance to tradition and therefore free to question its flaws. Overlapping the caste system is the intricate web of clans, each with its own heraldry, customs, and sacred spaces. Some clans, such as the Narkanai, claim descent from the first settlers of the Twilight Belt, their bloodlines tracing back to the legendary matriarch Uvalai, said to have spoken with the winds. Others, like the Shorvak, built their reputation as spice harvesters and surface scouts, forging pacts with smugglers and maintaining secret routes through the Bright Lands. There are warrior clans like the Drenkai who guard ancient forges and carve weapons from the obsidian hearts of fallen meteors, and scholarly clans such as the Velrasi, who serve as archivists and oracles, keeping alive the oral epics of the Twi'lek people in flame-lit recitations that last for days. Clan rivalries, though often dormant, run deep. Feuds can last for generations, resolved only through ceremonial trials or the rare union of marriage between heirs. In Calyun, each clan maintains a domed sanctuary known as a Karalas, a place of memory and judgment. These sanctuaries are carved uniquely to reflect clan values, some adorned with tapestries, others with crystal mosaics or underground gardens that bloom only under specific humidity conditions. It is within these spaces that young Twi'leks are formally named, that disputes are settled through silent testimony, and that initiates undertake their Cathani, the rite of emergence into adult life. During this ritual, the individual must navigate the labyrinth of whispers, an ancient series of tunnels beneath the city designed to test both resolve and instinct. Along the way, they are guided only by Lekku-based cues from masked elders, learning to listen not just with ears, but with the language of the body and the wisdom of breath. The structure of clan governance is equally nuanced. Each major city hosts a Lekku, or circle of consensus, composed of selected elders from recognized clans. This council meets in a vaulted chamber lined with sound-absorbing stone, so that only the clearest voices carry. No decision is ever made in haste. Matters of trade, inter-clan law, off-world relations, and internal dissent are debated in sessions that can last weeks, with deliberations marked not by oratory, but by ritualized silence. To speak out of turn is to dishonor one's ancestors. To answer with aggression is to break the chain of memory. Observers watch from carved balconies, whispering through Lekku as they interpret the posture and rhythm of the elders' movements. Outside the chamber, messages are etched into shifting light boards and carried by runners through the corridors, eventually reaching the clan leaders who await consensus before acting. Lekku, though smaller than Canon, plays a vital role in balancing power. Built across a narrow canyon bridged by tremor-resistant suspension roads, it is a city designed for defense and strategic oversight. Its clans often oversee spice routes, manage external communications, and house the elite Pathwatchers, navigators who chart safe passages through Ryloth's ever-changing cave systems. Lekku's leadership rotates biannually, with each participating clan taking a turn to host the Banner of Vision, a crystalline staff passed from elder to elder during the twilight hour of the solstice. The city's architecture reflects its transient governance, with modular council chambers and collapsible sanctuaries that can be repurposed based on need. It is through these cities and structures that the Twi'leks have endured, surviving countless invasions, occupations, and betrayals by foreign powers. The Hutts, with their cruel appetites, sought to strip the clans of authority, imposing puppet chieftains and undermining the Lekku. Yet even under bondage, the clans held their rights in secret caverns, their councils conducted by flickering torchlight and coded Lekku. The Empire followed, building surface garrisons and attempting to install a planetary governor in Lekku. But the clan structure proved too decentralized, too organic to crush. Resistance bloomed not from orders but from memory, not from ideology but from the simple understanding that the clan is the root, and to betray it is to become nothing. In modern times, the return of limited autonomy has reignited old alliances and rivalries. Some seek to modernize the clan system, integrating it into the galactic political structure, while others view such efforts as a slow erosion of Twi'lek identity. New factions have emerged within the Askardari, younger voices challenging the silence of the elders, demanding transparency and reform. In Kaliyun's lower tiers, activists of the Tharizen gather to rewrite the Lexithar, calling for the restoration of exiled families and the recognition of mixed-blood Twi'leks born in Diaspora. Meanwhile, the caste lines, though blurred, remain a source of tension, with disputes arising over the allocation of food, water, and tunnel space during the dry seasons. And yet, through it all, the clans endure. Their names echo through the caverns, etched into the walls, sung in the old tongue during the arrival of the breast tie, the flowering rains that signal a new cycle of life. When a Twi'lek speaks of loyalty, they speak not of flags or systems, they speak of clan. When they bury their dead, they do so in the echo of their ancestors' breath. And when they raise their children, it is within the stories passed down through the Karalas, lit by crystal flame and remembered in silence. To know the Twi'leks is to walk their corridors, to bow before their sanctuaries, and to understand that the strength of Ryloth lies not in domination, but in the enduring ties of those who remember the shape of home in every stone and every name. Chapter 4: Twilight Temples and Ancient Faiths. Long before the rise of empires, before the first Hutts cast their greedy shadows across Ryloth's surface, before the Jedi and Sith even dared set foot upon its twilight soil, there were whispers in the stone and songs in the wind. The Twi'leks, born from a world suspended between fire and frost, found their truths not in books or icons, but in the elemental balance that governed every breath of their lives. Their spirituality was not something external, something brought down by prophets or gifted by divine revelation. It was immanent, woven into the stone beneath their feet, the pulse of the wind through their Lekku, and the endless, unmoving horizon that divided day from night. In this land of extremes, faith was not an indulgence, but a necessity, and through it, the Twi'leks endured. Central to Twi'lek spiritual life were the Twilight temples, structures so ancient their origins have long since faded into myth. Most were not built in the conventional sense, but discovered, carved into the deepest layers of the planet, where geothermal heat and mineral veins converged in natural sanctuaries. It is said that the first of these temples, Ryloth, the breath of balance, was not made by Twi'lek hands at all, but revealed by a great windstorm that tore open the stone like a wound. There, in the exposed cavern, the first shamans felt the convergence of forces. Hot steam rising from the depths, cold air descending from the canyons, and the perfect equilibrium where light filtered in at dawn through a crystalline skylight, painting the walls in vibrant hues that shifted by the minute. It was here they declared that Ryloth itself was not merely alive, but conscious, and that its moods could be read in the movement of air and stone. The temples served as spiritual centers, but they were also sites of practical communion. In a land so dangerous, the line between faith and survival was thin. Worshippers brought offerings of water, Ryle sap, or woven skycloth to lay on the altars, believing that these acts would ensure favorable wind patterns, fertile rock gardens, or protection from subterranean quakes. Wind was sacred, the breath of the ancestors. It was believed that the souls of the dead traveled along the high currents, whispering to the living through the narrow passes and rock tubes that hummed when the weather changed. Shamans known as Ariths were trained from youth to listen to these whispers, interpreting omens from the tone and pitch of the wind as it passed through temple corridors and crevices. The most revered among them could sense storms hours before they arrived, not by sight or smell, but by vibration and song. The pantheon of the Twi'lek people was never codified in the way galactic religions often are. There were no scrolls, no binding commandments. Instead, each clan had its own lineage of deities or spirit beings, many of which shared characteristics, suggesting a common origin far in the pre-literate past. At the center of most traditions stood Ashley, the shifting flame, deity of balance and light, often depicted as a figure with Lekku made of fire and smoke, one trailing toward the sun, the other vanishing into night. Ashley was not a god in the traditional sense, but an expression of equilibrium. In some tellings, she walked the twilight belt at dusk, her steps burning the path where new cities would rise. In others, she was the last breath before death and the first exhale at birth. Her rites involved silent dances at the edge of canyons, where worshippers balanced stones in intricate towers and waited for the wind to knock them down, interpreting the pattern of the collapse as a divine message. Another widely venerated figure was Keldaz, the warden below. Unlike Ashley, Keldaz was feared as much as honored, a guardian of the deep places, said to dwell in magma vents and judge the worth of those who dared descend into his domain. Pilgrims seeking absolution or answers would venture into the steam caves bearing masks and inhaling the heated vapor laced with hallucinogenic moss. There, in the darkness, they would listen for his voice in the bubbling walls, and if they emerged alive, they were considered reborn. The rite of Keldaz was particularly prevalent among the Nathvari artisan caste, who believed that forging anything of worth required sacrifice and communion with the warden's flame. Even today, certain metallurgists will not begin their craft without first burning a scrap of cloth inscribed with the names of their ancestors over an open vent. Among the most enduring spiritual narratives is that of Nola Tarkona, a figure who straddles the line between myth and history. To the galaxy at large, she is remembered as the militant Twi'lek leader of the Diversity Alliance during the unstable period after the fall of the Empire. But to many on Ryloth, Nola is a prophetess and revolutionary saint, one who rekindled the sacred fire of resistance in a time of cultural collapse. According to temple oral history, Nola was visited by a three-eyed spirit during a sandstorm in the ruins of Ryloth. The spirit, speaking through a chorus of winds, showed her the weeping faces of Twi'leks enslaved across the galaxy, their Lekku bound, their songs silenced. Nola, once a humble votary of Ashley, cast off her priestess robes and took up the bloodstaff of the exiled clan Korla, leading a campaign of liberation that would span star systems. Though her methods were extreme and her legacy contested, Her story is preserved in both temples and rebel shrines, where her name is not whispered in fear or regret, but in reverence. To some, she is the flame reborn, Ashley in mortal form. The spiritual practices of the Twi'leks are deeply tied to cycles, light and shadow, warmth and cold, stillness and motion. This duality, shaped by the natural world, permeates their rituals. The Festival of the Long Dusk, held at the halfway mark between the bright season and the shrouded season, is a ceremonial reenactment of the world's balance. Entire clans emerge from the underground sanctuaries to build wind catchers, delicate reed and thread constructs that respond to even the faintest breeze. As the sun hovers eternally at the horizon, the wind catchers turn, spin, or collapse. Each movement is read by temple readers who proclaim fortunes, warnings, or clan blessings. No two readings are ever the same, for the wind has no master, only listeners. Shadow is treated not as a place of fear, but of reverence. In a world where light burns and cold kills, it is the twilight, the dim, the in-between, that offers sanctuary. Many Twi'lek rituals involve shadow play, with dancers performing in candlelight behind translucent rock silk screens. These dances tell the stories of creation, exile, love, and betrayal, and each flick of the Lekku against the cloth carries more meaning than spoken words could convey. During these performances, silence is absolute. To interrupt a shadow rite is to be marked by the wind, a cultural curse believed to bring misfortune and spiritual dissonance until the offending soul makes pilgrimage to 3 specific temples and offers apology through motion, not words. Force-based sects have also emerged across Ryloth's history, blending local spirituality with sensitivity to the greater mysteries of the galaxy. The most renowned among these is the Order of the First Current, a hidden tradition of force-sensitive Twi'leks who believe the force flows most purely through sound and air. Rather than manipulating the force through will or aggression, they attune themselves to it like a musician to vibration, enhancing their Lekku sensitivity until they can perceive the movements of beings before they arrive, or calm violence with a single resonant breath. The Order's teachings were passed in melodic hums and breathwork sequences, often practiced in caverns so acoustically perfect that a single note could echo for minutes. The Jedi Order, though aware of them, left the sect largely undisturbed, perhaps recognizing that their methods were not confrontational and that their influence was deeply rooted in local tradition. With the rise of the Empire, however, the Order vanished, its temples sealed, its texts hidden in wind-carved hollows where only the initiated would ever hear them again. Sacred sites dot Ryloth's landscape, many of them half forgotten. The Temple of the Seven Whispers, located deep within the Gurth crevasse, is said to resonate with a different vocal tone depending on the hour of the day, as the sun's position subtly alters the temperature and shape of internal currents. Only the pure of heart, so legend claims, can hear all 7 tones in a single visit. The shrine of the echoing dust lies at the edge of the frozen wastes, where pilgrims throw powdered dyes into the wind and watch as the cold carries them upward in spiraling columns of color. And perhaps most hauntingly, the Cavern of Lyrity Tears contains pools of condensation that reflect not the present, but visions of loss, memories unspoken, regrets buried by clan law. Few return unchanged from that place, and those who do often adopt lives of seclusion or spiritual counsel. Modernization has thinned the temple ranks, and the young often drift toward the pragmatism of technology, trade, or galactic culture. Still, the old ways persist. During disasters, Twi'leks still gather at the nearest sanctum, breathing in rhythm, pressing their Lekku to the stone, waiting for the wind to offer its verdict. Spiritual guides, no longer called Aeriths but sometimes simply elders of the breath, hold quiet courts in lower-tier caverns, listening to the unheard and guiding the grief-stricken back toward balance. In Diaspora communities, scattered across Nar Shaddaa, Coruscant, and Lesser Moons, small shrines are maintained in closets and alleyways, built of scavenged material but lit by the same reverence. The ancient faiths of Ryloth were never about domination or punishment. They did not claim to hold all answers, nor did they demand submission. They asked only that one listen to the land, to the breath, to the pulse that moves through all things. In a world so defined by extremes, the Twi'leks found the divine not in certainty, but in harmony. And though the stars have drawn their children far from the canyons and caverns of their birth, the old winds still blow. Through the silence, through the dust, through the breath of memory, they call their people home. Chapter 5, Chains Beneath the Suns. There are places on Ryloth where the sunlight never reaches, tunnels so deep and old that the air tastes of rusted memories and distant sorrow. In these hollowed spaces, the past whispers through cracks in the stone, faint echoes of chains dragged across rock, of muffled cries swallowed by shadow. These are not merely haunted caverns or forgotten passages. They are the corridors of pain, the arteries of a history so intimate and enduring that it stains the very identity of the Twi'lek people. Slavery was not a brief chapter in the Twi'lek story. It was an era so long and pervasive that its legacy continues to shape every breath taken on Ryloth. It was not merely economic or political. It was cultural violence, generational erasure, and spiritual desecration. And while the galaxy may have moved on, many Twi'leks still live with the chains of that past coiled tightly around their sense of self, inheritance, and worth. The roots of Twi'lek enslavement stretch back further than the galactic histories are willing to admit. Ryloth, isolated and dangerous, was always seen as a world of mystery and promise to the opportunistic minds of the Outer Rim. When the Hutt cartel first turned its attention toward the planet, they did not arrive with armies, they arrived with markets. Trade outposts became bases, partnerships became demands, and clans that once stood proud found themselves slowly indebted, outmaneuvered by spice barons who understood how to manipulate desperation. The Hutts were patient colonizers, not conquerors. They waited until famine, drought, or surface collapse forced clans to seek outside help, and when they came to offer rations, water, or shelter, the price was silence, obedience, and flesh. What began as selective debt bondage metastasized into systematic trafficking. At first, only convicted criminals or exiled Tharizen were sold off-world, justified by ancient laws and emergency edicts. But soon those boundaries blurred. Beautiful youths were recruited for cultural exchange programs that ended on auction blocks in Nal Huda. Artisans disappeared after producing a commission for an off-world client, never seen again. Entire families were sold when a single clan elder defaulted on a spice shipment. These acts were not hidden. They were enshrined in contracts written in Basic, signed under pressure, and backed by mercenaries who patrolled the surface settlements. The Hutts didn't need to enslave with violence. They enslaved with bureaucracy and plausible deniability. The entertainment trade became one of the most insidious vectors of this oppression. Twi'lek dancers, with their grace, rhythmic Lekku, and exotic features, were paraded through cantinas, casinos, and private palaces as living ornaments, symbols of wealth, indulgence, and control. To the galaxy, they were desirable. To the Twi'leks, they were desecrated. The art of movement, once a sacred expression of prayer, became a performance dictated by leering off-worlders. Lekku dances originally meant to communicate birth, balance, or lamentation were reduced to silent titillation, their meaning stripped away by ignorance and appetite. Many of the most renowned stars of the Twi'lek performance circuit were slaves whose names had been replaced, whose heritage was erased by agents who offered them credits for loyalty and shock collars for defiance. There were those who rose within this system, chained queens in golden cages who wielded influence from within. But even they bore scars beneath the silks, knew the weight of every command masked by a smile. Personal accounts of this time, often passed through oral tradition rather than written record, offer glimpses into the quiet horror endured. One tale tells of Sheena Caress, a singer from the Varnkavari caste taken from Lesu under the guise of trade negotiations. She was offered a contract to perform in a resort on Nar Shaddaa, only to be handed to a Hutt lord as part of a business favor. For 10 standard years, she sang every night in a glass sphere suspended above a spice pit, unable to hear her own voice over the crowd's roar. Her Lekku were bound in golden cuffs that sent shocks through her spine if she sang in Twi'leki. And yet, she persisted, hiding coded messages in the rhythm of her song, signaling resistance cells in the audience, becoming a living cipher of rebellion. When she finally escaped, she did not return to Ryloth. Instead, she burned the resort to ash, taking with her 24 captives and leaving behind only silence. Her name, spoken now in certain temples, is uttered like a breath between prayers, never louder. The caves of Ryloth, ancient and sprawling, became arteries of survival as well as suffering. Smuggling routes evolved from mining shafts and abandoned dwellings, known only to clan navigators who remembered the old maps. These passageways allowed for the clandestine movement of Twi'leks from threatened villages to safer cities and, when possible, to secret starports hidden beneath cliff faces. Resistance fighters, many of them former slaves, organized covert extractions using falsified trade ships, bribed port controllers, and decades of tunnel lore. The smugglers who aided them were not always Twi'leks. Some were human defectors from Imperial supply lines. Others were disgraced spice runners looking for redemption. The cost of failure was severe. Captured Twi'leks were often made examples of, paraded through towns in restraint, tortured in public squares, or sold back to their own clans under false pretenses only to be taken again in the night. Even as the Galactic Republic rose to prominence, its reach seldom extended into Ryloth's darker spaces. Senators made speeches condemning slavery while ignoring the contracts written in their own districts. Judicial investigators toured Ryloth once every few cycles, accompanied by heavily armed escorts, never straying far from the secure zones. The deeper truth was that Twi'lek lives were never protected by the galactic core. Their suffering was acceptable collateral in the pursuit of spice, territory, or political favor. And when the Republic fell and the Empire rose, the transition was not a rupture, but a continuation. Stormtroopers replaced mercenaries. Mining quotas increased. Punishments grew more severe. The chains remained, though now their color bore the insignia of a new regime. Under the Empire, Ryloth became a strategic resource depot. Entire clans were relocated from their sanctuaries into labor camps near the frozen wastes, forced to extract minerals, refine Ryle, or work in food processing facilities that fed the Imperial fleet. Children were separated from their families and sent to re-education centers, where their language was forbidden, and their Lekku wrapped in standard-issue cloth. Rebel cells formed in response, led by figures like Cham Syndulla and the warriors of Free Ryloth, but their victories were Pyrrhic, gained through blood and fire, answered with orbital bombardments and the decimation of entire clan archives. The Empire did not merely take labor, it took culture, memory, and the right to shape one's own story. The entertainment trade flourished under Imperial oversight, cloaked now in contracts and state-sanctioned recruitment agencies. Twi'lek performers were brought to Coruscant, Corellia, and other hubs under the promise of safety and opportunity, only to vanish behind locked doors. Those who resisted were labeled insurgents or traitors. Those who complied were paraded on propaganda holos, held up as symbols of unity and integration. Off-world Twi'leks, many born into diaspora communities, were often unaware of the true cost of this visibility until it was too late. For every Aayla Secura who rose within the Jedi Order, there were hundreds more whose stories were never told, whose only mark upon the galaxy was the curve of a silhouette in someone else's memory. Despite it all, resistance never died. Songs of rebellion, composed in Twi'leki and sung in subterranean chambers, carried code and strategy. Dancers in hut palaces passed messages to smugglers through the precise motion of their Lekku. Slave registers were forged, altered, and erased by slicers sympathetic to the cause. And across Ryloth, mothers whispered to their children not just lullabies, but the names of ancestors taken by the trade, names meant to be spoken aloud one day in mourning and in triumph. This quiet rebellion, slow and persistent, kept the flame alive. It was not always grand, but it was always present. When the New Republic came, there were celebrations in the cities and cautious optimism in the tunnels. But the wounds were too deep for quick healing. The Hutt influence, while diminished, remained strong in certain sectors. Illegal trafficking persisted under different names. The galaxy, eager to move forward, seldom paused to ask what restitution looked like for a people whose history had been stolen piece by piece. Some Twi'leks found places in the new regime, taking roles as senators, advisors, or cultural liaisons. Others returned home to rebuild temples, restore clan archives, and seek justice for crimes that would never see trial. And many, broken by years of erasure, disappeared into the dust, their stories fading like echoes in the caves where it all began. The scars of slavery are not just physical. They are embedded in the silence between words, in the pause before a dance begins, in the hesitation of a child when asked to speak their true name. They live in the architecture of Kaliyun's lower tiers, where the walls are thicker, the corridors narrower, designed to hide, to escape, to resist. They live in the songs of mourning that still name the lost. And they live in the enduring refusal of the Twi'lek people to be defined by their chains. For every story of suffering, there is one of defiance. For every dancer forced to perform, there was one who turned movement into message. For every shipment of slaves that departed Ryloth, there was a whisper in the wind plotting a return. To know the Twi'leks is to know this pain, not as a footnote in galactic history, but as a central thread in the tapestry of endurance. It is to understand that every Lekku bears the weight of memory, and that beneath the surface of every celebration, every song, every act of beauty, lies the unbroken will of a people who have survived the suns and the shadows, the bonds and betrayals, and still dare to rise. Chapter 6, Rebels of Ryloth. The soil of Ryloth has always been soaked in silence. It is not the silence of peace, but the silence of watchfulness, of people who listen before they speak, who study the wind before stepping from the cave. It is the silence of resistance born not from ideology, but necessity. And within that silence, among the dust and stone and shadowed breath of forgotten corridors, there has always been rebellion. Not rebellion in the grand, operatic sense that the galaxy has come to revere. No stirring speeches in the Senate, no banners unfurled against imperial skylines, but rebellion in the smallest and fiercest ways. A child guiding a wounded fighter through a smuggler's tunnel. A mother feeding spies from her garden beneath a hut-controlled plateau. A clan elder erasing names from a slaver's manifest with a single, practiced motion. These are the rebels of Ryloth, unheralded, unsung, and unstoppable. Before the Clone Wars gave name to conflict and the Empire gave it machinery, there were already fires burning beneath the planet's crust. For centuries, Twi'leks had resisted foreign rule in quiet defiance, not with fleets or declarations, but with sabotage, whispers, and the preservation of memory. Clans held onto songs outlawed by Hut enforcers, hiding them in ceremonial dances that seemed harmless to outsiders. Spice harvesters would delay shipments by days at a time, citing seismic shifts while quietly redirecting crates to off-world allies sympathetic to their plight. Pilgrims on supposed spiritual journeys would carry stolen intel beneath their robes. Resistance was not one act, it was a culture. When the Clone Wars erupted across the stars and the Separatists occupied Ryloth, the planet's people once again found themselves caught between powers that did not understand them. Count Dooku's confederacy arrived cloaked in promises, autonomy, trade, security, but it delivered only blockades, orbital bombardments, and the replacement of one occupation with another. It was during this time that Cham Syndulla emerged, not as a general, not as a politician, but as a leader of necessity. A native of Lekku, born of a minor artisan clan, Cham had seen enough of off-world interference to understand that neither the Republic nor the Separatists viewed Twi'lek lives as anything but strategic assets. He did not raise his voice to appeal for aid. He raised it to organize, to unify, to resist. Syndulla's movement began with no name, no structure. It was a series of agreements whispered between spice runners, scouts, and subterranean engineers. He understood the terrain, the tunnels, the rhythm of the patrols, and he built a resistance that moved like smoke through cracks in the stone. Using salvaged droid parts and repurposed mining equipment, his fighters struck at supply depots and sabotaged fuel lines. They ambushed transports using thermal geysers as cover and redirected separatist algorithms through scrambled Twi'leki signals only they could interpret. The Republic eventually answered, not because of Ryloth's suffering, but because of its strategic value. And alongside the clone armies came Jedi generals, among them Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Syndulla accepted their aid, but never their authority. He fought beside them, but not for them. When the droids were routed and the battle won, he did not celebrate with fanfare. He remained wary, aware that victory in one battle did not mean freedom in the next. His fears proved prophetic. The Republic transformed into the Empire, and its boot came down harder than the last. Garrison cities were built along key trade routes, and Twi'lek miners were once again conscripted under imperial contracts. Clan leaders were pressured into collaboration, and those who resisted disappeared into prisons or were paraded before their own people as broken examples. Cham Syndulla refused. He retreated into the wilderness, rebuilding his cells from the ash of old uprisings. He changed names, relocated camps weekly, and communicated through a network of glider scouts who etched messages into the undersides of leaves or carried them in scent-coated oils. What he lacked in numbers, he made up for in terrain. He knew the storm paths, the collapse zones, the old temples no map recorded. And with this knowledge, he kept Ryloth alive. But Cham was not alone. In the shadows of history, far from the official holos, others rose and fought in quieter corners. Numa was just a child when the droids marched through her village, her parents lost in the smoke, her home shattered. But she survived, found by clone troopers Waxer and Boyle who, in an act of compassion rare for war, carried her to safety. That moment changed her, carved something into her that would later bloom into action. She became a symbol of survival to her people, and as she grew, she did not forget. Numa joined the Free Ryloth movement not as a figurehead, but as a warrior, calm, calculating, and fierce. She led raids on Imperial convoys, planted charges beneath supply tanks, and used her small frame to infiltrate ventilation shafts that no soldier could follow. Her codename was Ghost Wind, and entire garrisons were dismantled without a sound under her guidance. Though many remember her as the orphan child in the arms of clone troopers, those who fought beside her remember a woman who never stopped moving, never hesitated, and never lost sight of the quiet rage that drove her. Even deeper into obscurity lies the story of Ninra's Cell, a collective of ex-slaves, smugglers, and surface nomads who operated in the canyon lands beyond the reach of both Empire and Rebellion. Ninra herself was a former spice chemist whose family had been executed by HUD enforcers during the early occupation. Disillusioned with both galactic factions, she led her people with brutal precision, targeting slaver networks that continued to operate in the shadows of legitimacy. Her tactics were unconventional. She used misinformation, faked disasters, and created holographic illusions of sandstorms to cover extractions. She offered no allegiance to the New Republic, no broadcasts of intent, only results. Entire Hutt caravans vanished under her watch, their slave cages found days later, empty and coated in red dust. Survivors taken in by her cell were given new identities and trained in practical sabotage. How to disable repulsor fields with sharpened stone, how to disrupt communications using minerals harvested from cliff moss. Ninra was never seen without a mask of polished obsidian carved in the likeness of a Lekku-wrapped ancestor. It is said that when she was finally captured by bounty hunters, she detonated a sonic charge that collapsed the canyon around her and the Imperial agents who came to claim her reward. No remains were found. Beyond these names, thousands more played their part in the quiet war. Farmers who salted the fields meant for Imperial harvest. Pilots who crashed their ships to prevent cargo from reaching command. Engineers who sabotaged life support systems in garrison outposts, escaping through thermal vents. Monks of the old Twilight temples who encoded enemy movements into the rhythm of prayer chants broadcast on ancient frequencies. These acts of defiance were rarely coordinated, rarely recognized, but together they formed a lattice of resistance that no empire, however vast, could fully extinguish. For every prison camp established, another cell formed. For every collaborator bribed or broken, two more dissenters were born. The early days of the rebellion drew on this spirit. Twi'lek operatives became some of the most effective agents in the galactic underground, not just because of their skills, but because they had never expected to be saved. They operated with the knowledge that help would not come, that survival depended on community and memory and instinct. Their Lekku spoke in codes the Empire never understood. Their maps were drawn not in ink, but in rock patterns and wind paths. And when the larger rebellion began to swell and coalesce into strategy and battle plans, it was Twi'leks who carried messages through the underlevels of Nar Shaddaa, who smuggled explosives beneath spice sacks, who ferried wounded to Ryloth's healing vents while the galaxy debated policy. Yet for all their service, Twi'leks were rarely granted prominence in the post-imperial narratives. The heroes raised in statues seldom bore Lekku. The senators named in treaties rarely came from the Twilight, and so the rebellion remained personal. In the archives of Kalayan, below the chambers where the elders deliberate, there is a wall etched with names. No titles, no dates, just names row after row of those who vanished during the occupation. Elders call it the Wind Ledger, and every solstice a choir sings beneath it. No words, only tone. A song shaped by breath and memory. The kind of song that carries meaning no holonet transmission ever could. Rebellion on Ryloth was never about winning. It was about existing on one's own terms. About refusing to be rewritten, repackaged, or erased. It was about a people who knew that freedom would not be granted from above, but carved from stone and shadow by their own hands. It was not clean. It was not noble. It was necessary. And it continues, in the songs sung to newborns, in the scars hidden beneath jewelry, in the tunnels that still carry coded light signals from settlement to settlement. The fight never ended. It only changed shape. To understand Twi'lek rebellion is to see it not as a response to tyranny, but as a continuation of culture. It is what happens when a people with no voice find ways to speak anyway. Through movement, through silence, through the wind, always through the wind. Chapter 7, Traders, Smugglers, and Shadow Deals. In the galactic imagination, Ryloth has always been seen as a world of contradiction, a place of hardship and beauty, silence and rebellion, bondage and resistance. But beneath all of that lies another identity, one whispered across cantinas and cartel palaces from Nal Huda to Nar Shaddaa, one inked into the balance sheets of syndicates and bartered across a million shadow ports. Ryloth is a world of spice. Not the kind found in pristine medical labs or harvested on mechanized farms, but something older, wilder, and infinitely more dangerous. Ryle, the planet's native narcotic mineral, is both a miracle and a curse, used in medicine, weapon manufacturing, and neural stimulants. Mined from the crust by hand, refined in torchlit tunnels, and shipped in silence under the cover of shifting storms, Ryle is the pulse that drives Ryloth's uneasy relationship with the galaxy. And where there is spice, there are always deals. Not the kind written in Republic ink, but in blood, breath, and betrayal. The Ryle fields are not fields at all, but seams of mineralized compound that grow along fault lines, blooming like crystalline fungi under specific geothermal and atmospheric conditions unique to Ryloth. Harvesting it requires patience, tradition, and risk. Overexposure to raw Ryle vapor can induce hallucinations, memory degradation, or in rare cases, permanent synaptic disassociation. It must be mined carefully, dried under wind-regulated vents, and packed in compressed dust or flake form depending on its destination. Entire clans in Kaliyun and Ruhak have specialized in this work for generations, developing rituals and safety customs that border on the religious. Children are taught to identify the color gradations of high-purity Ryle by candlelight, while miners wear woven masks soaked in herbal resin to ward off vapor sickness. The finest Ryle, the kind that fetches exorbitant prices in the core worlds, is said to glow faintly when undisturbed, pulsing like the breath of the planet itself. For centuries, Twi'lek clans harvested and traded Ryle among themselves, exporting small amounts to trusted partners and using the rest for local healing practices and ceremonial dream rites. But as Ryloth's existence became known to the greater galaxy, its spice became currency, and currency invited predators. The Hutts were the first to recognize Ryle's potential as more than a local curio. With their networks already entrenched in spice distribution and slaving, they leveraged clan debts and surface control to corner the trade. Entire harvests were seized under protection agreements, and enforcement crews installed puppet leaders who diverted shipments to cartel ports. In time, the Hutts replaced Twi'lek brokers with their own representatives, Gamorreans who couldn't speak the language, droids who couldn't feel the air shift when a vein was about to collapse. But the spice flowed, and with it came power. Some Twi'leks, rather than be consumed, adapted. They became shadow traders, navigating the narrow spaces between loyalty and leverage. These were not collaborators, but survivors who learned the rules of cartel economics and used them to carve out influence. One such figure was Salami Kor, once a clan daughter from the Nightspire region, who built an empire from a single failed Hutt shipment. When a cartel freighter crashed in the deserts of the Bright Lands, she led a crew of salvagers to recover the cargo. Instead of returning it, she repackaged it, sold it under a new sigil, and used the profits to bribe local enforcers. Within a decade, she controlled 3 major tunnels, 2 off-world routes, and a fleet of spice gliders that could fly below Imperial radar. Known as the Ryle Widow for the black veil she wore over her Lekku in mourning for her murdered brother, Salami was as respected as she was feared. She hosted negotiations inside underground cisterns where the walls echoed every lie, and she punished betrayal by exile, not to the surface, but to the spice mines themselves. Her influence waned during the Imperial occupation, but her methods became legend. Even today, some clan traders still perform her luck ritual. 3 silent steps before a deal, 1 breath held until the contract is sealed. With the expansion of galactic criminal enterprises, Ryloth's Ryle trade became a web of shadow deals and backroom arrangements. The Black Sun, ever opportunistic, began investing in deep shaft operations. Unlike the flamboyant Hutts, Black Sun agents moved through intermediaries, Twi'lek fronts, droid brokers, human financiers with clean records but dirty hearts. Their specialty was refinement and distribution. Using slicers and spice chemists, they developed high-potency variants of Ryle combined with synthetic additives, creating designer stimulants that flooded the underworld of Corellia, Coruscant, and Taris. In return, they offered security to vulnerable settlements, hiring mercenaries to protect shipments from rival raids. But protection was a euphemism, and the cost of defiance was vaporization. Entire mining villages disappeared overnight, collapsed from above, the tunnels sealed in what were officially recorded as natural cave-ins. Survivors spoke of plasma charges, saboteur droids, and silent men in white gloves who smiled while they destroyed homes. The complexity of Ryloth's smuggling routes rivals that of any navigational chart in the galaxy. With the planet's treacherous surface and shifting winds, traditional flight paths are suicidal. Instead, smugglers use deep channel currents and glider wings made from stone-infused cloth that blends with the twilight sky. These crafts are often unpowered, using heat thermals to coast between launch towers and landing crags marked by carved symbols only Twi'leks can read. Some gliders even operate from hidden platforms near the frozen wastes, using aurora activity to mask liftoff signatures. Others travel underground, with freight sleds on magnetic rails moving through abandoned lava tubes that stretch for kilometers beneath the clan cities. These routes are fiercely guarded, passed from generation to generation, and protected by traps, illusions, and in some cases, sentient tunnel dwellers whose loyalty is bought with tribute and silence. Pirates, too, have carved their niche in Ryloth's economy. Among the most infamous is Vimachar, the so-called Sky Queen of Kithrak's Gulch. Born to a disgraced caste, Vima turned to piracy after her lover was sold into hut bondage. She assembled a crew of outcasts, exiled clan members, and slicers fleeing imperial conscription, and together they hijacked supply lines across the Outer Rim. What set Vima apart was her command of both air and ground operations. Her flagship, the Shiverbone, was a heavily modified transport with cloaking capabilities and a memory metal hull that could reshape itself mid-flight. On the ground, her network of spies infiltrated cartel operations, rerouted spice, and sabotaged rival refineries. Vima's crew distributed their profits to the poorest Twi'lek settlements, funding secret schools, food caches, and medical shelters. To the Empire, she was a terrorist. To Ryloth, she was a guardian. She disappeared during a raid on a hut-controlled orbital station, presumed dead, though some claim to have seen her wandering the spice flats, wrapped in black, her Lekku braided with starlight. Economically, Ryloth's relationship with the galaxy has always been transactional and fraught. The Twi'leks did not ask to become exporters of illicit goods, they were cornered into it. The wealth that passed through their planet often left no trace but scars. Cartel agents took Ryle by the ton, paid in credits that depreciated before they reached the clan markets. In times of famine or collapse, spice lords from off-world would offer aid only in exchange for land rights or exclusive mining contracts. The galaxy consumed Ryloth's lifeblood, but gave little in return. And yet, from the shadows of these transactions, a new generation of Twi'lek traders emerged. Those who studied off-world law, who hired mercenaries of their own, who played the game not with desperation, but with strategy. Among these was Tan Vikash, a financier who grew up in the lowest tiers of Kaliyun, orphaned by spice war crossfire. Tan studied cartel economics like scripture, eventually creating a private broker firm that funneled Ryloth-based spice operations through a shell corporation on Ord Mantell. He manipulated market surges, undercut Black Sun's synthetic products with purified Ryle, and bought influence in the mid-rim trade guilds using untraceable credits. By the time the New Republic attempted to regulate spice traffic, Tan already controlled more legitimate export licenses than most core systems combined. Some called him a sellout, others called him a savant. He called himself what his ancestors once were, a free Twi'lek dealing on his own terms. The current era has not erased the shadows. Ryle remains both boon and burden. New regimes mean new paperwork, but the underworld remains unchanged in its hunger. Spice is still shipped in hidden compartments, still refined in hidden forges where the air glows violet and bitter. But Twi'leks have learned. They no longer sell their planet in pieces. They rent it, leverage it, cloak it in myth when necessary. The smuggling routes continue, but now they carry medicines, data cores, and rebel tech alongside spice. Pirate queens and trader barons have evolved into information brokers, smugglers of refugees, and architects of alliances. And so, Ryloth remains what it has always been, not a world defined by its chains, but by the way it turns burden into weapon, isolation into advantage, and silence into control. The deals made in its caves, in its canyons, and in the space between its two unyielding suns are never just about credits. They are about survival. They are about sovereignty. They are about a people who have learned to master the shadows because they were born from them. Chapter 8, Diaspora and the Outer Rim Echo. There is a sound that follows the Twi'lek people across the galaxy, not a song, not a chant, but an echo. It is the whisper of stone corridors buried beneath Ryloth's crust, the breath of wind winding through forgotten temples, the soft rustle of Lekku against silk as someone remembers a name in a tongue their neighbors do not speak. It is the resonance of displacement. For while the heart of the Twi'lek identity lies in the twilight belt of their homeworld, their lives, their stories, and their legacy have been scattered like Ryle dust across the stars. From the neon-lit alleys of Nar Shaddaa to the bureaucratic heights of Coruscant, Twi'leks have become fixtures in every corner of galactic society. But behind every smile, every dance, every word translated into basic, there exists a history of forced migration, reluctant assimilation, and cultural preservation waged in the shadows. The Twi'lek diaspora did not begin as a matter of choice. It began in chains. When the Hutts first began trafficking Twi'lek bodies for labor, entertainment, and status, the population of Ryloth began to leak outward, one slave transport at a time. These early waves of exile were not documented by the core worlds, but their effects can still be traced in the underbelly of cities like Nar Shaddaa and Ord Mantell, where Twi'lek quarters emerged in the shadows of towering spires. These districts were not neighborhoods in the traditional sense. They were enclaves of the displaced, clusters of survivors bound not by commerce or politics, but by memory. The names of clan ancestors were scrawled onto alley walls in disappearing ink. Stories were passed through locomotion behind curtained stalls, and rituals were adapted to the meager offerings of off-world soil. The cultural traditions of Ryloth, dance, food, ceremony, were preserved not for spectacle, but for survival. To forget the old songs was to be lost entirely. Nar Shaddaa, the Smugglers' moon, became the unofficial capital of the displaced. Its lawlessness allowed for a strange kind of freedom, albeit one painted in blood and compromise. Twi'lek brothels appeared within months of the first migration wave, staffed not just by slaves, but by those with no other options. The pleasure trade, already rife with exploitation, found in Twi'lek physiology and poise a commodity it could sell. But among the velvet curtains and synthesized perfume, acts of rebellion simmered. Some of the earliest union organizers in the moon's red light sectors were Twi'lek women who created support networks, communal funds, and safe zones for those seeking to escape. Using coded language and encrypted Lekku gestures, they tracked missing individuals, spread warning about dangerous clientele, and bartered with smugglers for passage off-world. One such figure, known only as Toravel, became a local legend for smuggling dozens of enslaved Twi'leks out of a cartel-controlled nightclub by disguising them as part of a traveling performance troupe. Her whereabouts remain unknown, but a mural of her likeness, silver eyes, Lekku braided with data fibers, adorns a hidden tunnel beneath the Corellian sector to this day. On Coruscant, the Twi'lek presence was more muted, but no less impactful. As refugees, entertainers, bureaucrats, and scholars, they found their way into the cracks of the Republic's administrative machinery. While few ever rose to positions of substantial political power, many served as aides, translators, and cultural attaches for Outer Rim representatives. Their fluency in both Basic and Twi'leki, combined with their cultural familiarity with negotiation through gesture and tone, made them ideal intermediaries. Some used this access to channel resources back to Ryloth, others used it to survive, and a rare few, like Professor Yelri Dawn, found ways to preserve the Twi'lek past within the Republic's own archives. Dawn, a historian born in the Diaspora district of Level 1313, spent her life collecting oral histories from exiled Twi'leks, digitizing ancient rituals, and fighting to have clan records recognized by galactic cultural institutions. Her papers on the Twilight caste systems and clan narration traditions are still cited in academic circles, though few who quote her ever know that her funding came from a collective of off-world Twi'lek street vendors pooling their credits. Among the most visible members of the Diaspora were those who became Jedi. Force-sensitive Twi'leks, while relatively rare, were not unheard of, and the Order welcomed them as it did all initiates, by severing them from their culture in the name of neutrality. For some, like the storied Ayla Secura, this meant growing up in the temple under the tutelage of Jedi Masters who sought to shape her identity as something beyond Twi'lek. She learned to master the Force, wield a lightsaber, and navigate the political complexities of war, but the cadence of her home tongue, the scent of Ryloth's dust, the pull of ancestral memory, these were things only reclaimed later, in quiet moments and private meditation. Secura, and others like her, often walked the line between galactic servant and cultural orphan. Yet in battle, in diplomacy, and in death, they carried the quiet pride of their people. Their presence in the Order was a symbol of the Twi'lek capacity to survive and adapt, even within systems that sought to erase them. In the criminal underworld, Twi'leks were often underestimated, seen as ornamental or easily bought. But in truth, they were some of the most formidable diplomats, spies, and dealmakers the syndicates ever produced. Their understanding of silence, subtlety, and the unspoken gave them an edge in negotiations where bluff and bravado failed. Figures like Vorek Jean, a former academic turned syndicate broker, built vast networks of influence not through violence, but through understanding. Jean's specialty was conflict resolution between rival gangs. Using Twi'leki and careful body language, he could diffuse tensions, restructure alliances, and redirect aggression into profit. He was famous for settling a four-way turf war on Nar Krita by inviting all parties into a glacial tomb and resolving the dispute without a single shot fired. His detractors claimed sorcery. Those who knew better claimed mastery. Jean credited nothing but his grandmother's lessons and the ability to hear what no one says. Other enclaves formed in unexpected places. On Tatooine, a community of Twi'lek exiles carved a settlement into the side of a canyon, using thermal rock to insulate their homes and growing algae gardens to survive. On Mon Cala, Twi'lek shipwrights contributed to rebel ship designs, their knowledge of subterranean infrastructure applied to deep-sea pressure engineering. Even on industrial worlds like Braca, Twi'leks salvaged not just starship wreckage but pieces of their culture, repurposing scraps into altars, story tablets, or learning tools for their children. These enclaves often functioned like miniatures of Ryloth itself, ruled by informal elders, organized by clan memory, and bound by the shared rituals of breath, movement, and story. They resisted assimilation not with open hostility, but by creating parallel lives, ones in which Twi'lek values remained intact despite the erosion of the galaxy around them. Assimilation, however, was inevitable for many. Children born in the core often grew up speaking basic first, learning Twi'leki only through gesture or secondhand lessons. Clan histories became folk tales, and sacred dances became stylized performances sold to tourists. Some Twi'leks adopted new names, new identities, discarding the markings of origin in exchange for security, respect, or survival. There was pain in this, but also agency. For every Twi'lek who mourned their lost rights, there was another who reshaped their culture to fit their reality. Musicians mixed ancient chants with synthwave beats in the alleys of Denon. Writers encoded resistance messages in novels sold under human pseudonyms. Underground fashion collectives turned ceremonial robes into streetwear, each stitch a hidden story. At times, Twi'leks became bridges, ambassadors of a culture many wanted to erase, but none could fully deny. Neela Rav, a cultural archivist and former dancer, founded the Twilight archive on Terminus, collecting fragments of songs, textiles, and Lekku gesture dictionaries from scattered enclaves. Her project became a rallying point for the Diaspora, with couriers delivering digitized artifacts across the stars, preserving what governments could not. Rav's motto, carved into the archive's entrance, reads simply, "We are not lost. We are everywhere." This sentiment captures the truth of the Twi'lek diaspora, not as a wound, but as a network, a web of breath and memory stretching from the galaxy's core to its forgotten edges. Even today, Ryloth remains both home and dream to those born far from its soil. Pilgrimages are made not just by believers or elders, but by children raised in metal towers who long to see the caves their parents described in lullabies. The journey is not always pleasant. Ryloth, scarred by history, does not always welcome its exiles back with open arms. Clan politics, caste expectations, and the burden of returning home as a stranger complicate reunions. Yet the act of return itself is sacred. To walk the cliffs, to feel the wind through the tunnels, to hear the old language spoken in its true rhythm, these moments reforge identity. They do not erase the life lived away from Ryloth. They connect it. Twi'leks are a people of the in-between, between light and dark, between silence and speech, between exile and home. Their diaspora is not a tragedy. It is a continuation. It is the rhythm of breath carried through space lanes, the flick of a head tail in the shadow of a towering spire, the taste of a root grown in foreign soil but brewed in familiar tea. The galaxy may scatter them, misunderstand them, use them, but it cannot break them. For even in the farthest reaches of the outer rim, the echo of Ryloth remains. In story, in breath, in the quiet power of those who remember not where they were born, but who they are. Chapter 9, After the Empire, A People Rebuild. The fall of the Empire did not bring immediate dawn to Ryloth. Like the slow rising of light across the planet's twilight belt, change came in halting, uncertain pulses. The Imperial banners were torn down, the garrisons hollowed out, the white-armored patrols disappeared into the caves or the dust or the void beyond the stars. But the silence that followed was not the exhale of peace. It was something else, a stillness haunted by absence. For a people so long defined by resistance and survival, the end of occupation was not a final chapter. It was the beginning of a long and painful unraveling. Liberation, after all, is not the end of suffering. It is the revelation of how much has been lost. The New Republic, bloated with victory and hope, turned its attention to the Outer Rim with promises of reconstruction, reparations, and recognition. For Ryloth, a world scarred by centuries of slavery, corruption, and galactic neglect, these promises came too late and too thin. The new diplomats arrived with press teams and translators, eager to draft treaties and secure shipping lanes, but they did not understand the fractures that lay beneath the surface. Twi'lek society, once held together by the pressure of oppression, was now exposed to its own internal wounds. Clan rivalries that had simmered for decades flared into political contention. Accusations of collaboration, of betrayal, of lost records and stolen rights rose like dust in a storm. The infrastructure was broken, communications shattered, transport lines unsafe, whole settlements still ruled by old cartel enforcers clinging to power behind locked gates. What the New Republic offered was a framework. What Ryloth needed was healing. It began not with governments, but with individuals. Reformers, elders, teachers, and survivors stepped forward, not to lead, but to rebuild. One of the earliest figures to emerge was Delian Sur, a former clan archivist turned orator who organized the first Twilight assembly beneath the fractured domes of Lower Kaliyun. Sur was not a politician by trade, but his voice, measured, resonant, shaped by years of reciting clan lineage in underground chambers, carried the weight of memory. He called not for vengeance, but for restoration. He proposed the merging of clan resources into shared projects: water purification, tunnel repair, education revival. His vision was simple: unity through shared survival. At first, few listened, but when the assembly produced its first successful water reclamation system in the scorched outskirts of the Bright Lands, other cities began to follow suit. Delian never accepted a formal title. He claimed to be merely a custodian of breath, repeating what the stones had already whispered. Alongside him, Twi'lek women, long marginalized within many conservative clan traditions, stepped into roles of leadership with ferocity and grace. Narathuan, once a spice worker in the depths of Lessa's lowest sectors, became the architect of a network of self-governed enclaves known as the Hollow Circles. Each circle operated independently, drawing on communal knowledge to rebuild housing, establish education hubs, and preserve language and ritual. Nara's model emphasized Lekku literacy, teaching children not just to speak Twi'leki, but to read the nuance of movement, to encode and decode meaning through silent rhythm. In her eyes, this was not simply cultural, it was defensive. She knew that the next occupier, whatever its face, would try to steal their voice again. She intended to ensure the people had a language no outsider could ever own. Meanwhile, the effort to dismantle the vast network of slaver operations that still clung to the margins of Ryloth was less poetic and more brutal. Though the Hutts had been weakened by the war and their dominion fractured, many of their agents remained entrenched in isolated strongholds, fortified mines, and decaying pleasure dens. The New Republic, wary of provoking further Outer Rim instability, tread lightly, too lightly. And so, Twi'leks took justice into their own hands. Former resistance fighters, pirates, and vigilantes coalesced into a dozen loosely affiliated militia groups, each with their own tactics and codes. Some, like the Red Dust Brigade, operated with surgical precision, identifying slaver strongholds and launching targeted strikes with salvaged Imperial tech. Others, like the Windburn Syndicate, operated more chaotically, razing entire compounds and executing captured overseers in the name of ancestral justice. The most controversial of these was the Shadow Flame, a clandestine cell known only through encrypted broadcasts and masked appearances. They targeted collaborators, Twi'leks who had profited under Imperial rule, who had sold their kin to cartels, who had silenced temple voices in exchange for safety. Their messages were poetic, spoken in ancient dialects over hijacked frequencies. Where the wind forgets, we remember. Where the flame hesitates, we burn. Some saw them as heroes. Others feared they would plunge Ryloth into civil bloodshed. But regardless of perspective, their existence reminded the people that freedom was not clean. It was born in pain and shaped by rage, and its edges were always sharp. Amid the turmoil, voices of diplomacy and preservation struggled to reclaim Ryloth's rightful place in the galactic community. Senator Lonya Vri, a former cultural ambassador who had spent her youth navigating the Coruscant bureaucracy, became Ryloth's first representative to the new Republic Senate. She arrived not in ceremonial garb, but in traveler's robes dusted with the red grit of her homeland, her Lekku etched with the lines of clan unity. Her first speech, delivered in accented Basic and translated simultaneously into Twi'lek, condemned the Republic's centuries of silence while demanding resources for reparative justice. She proposed bills to fund Ryloth's infrastructure, to trace and dismantle off-world slave routes still active in shadow markets, and to recognize Twi'lek as a protected galactic language. Her efforts were met with applause, resistance, and bureaucratic stonewalling. But she persisted. She knew that the real work was not in legislation, but in perception. She sought to reframe Ryloth not as a victim, but as a force. In the ruins of old temples, cultural preservationists began their own form of rebellion. They unearthed broken statues, restored forgotten inscriptions, and revived ceremonies once deemed heretical by both Hutts and Imperials. The Temple of the Seven Whispers, long sealed by Imperial engineers, was reopened by a team of monk historians and orphaned youths. Its resonance chambers, once feared lost, still sang when the wind passed through. Here, Twi'leks began to gather again for rites not seen in generations, rites of naming, of mourning, of remembering. Across Ryloth, similar restorations occurred. Dance troupes emerged from mining guilds. Folk songs echoed from cave amphitheaters. Lekku calligraphy, once forbidden in education centers, became a central subject in revived schools. Technology, too, became an instrument of healing. Diaspora Twi'leks from the core returned to Ryloth bringing data pads, hollow projectors, and encrypted archives of lost clan records. With them came hybrid knowledge, marrying off-world technical skills with ancestral tradition. Young Twi'leks used drones to map ancient cave routes, built wind-powered generators that harmonized with temple acoustics, and coded educational programs in dual languages. For the first time in generations, there was a bridge between the Ryloth of memory and the Ryloth of potential. It was imperfect, riddled with mistrust and missteps, but it was real. Yet not all was redemption. The process of rebuilding revealed wounds many had tried to bury. Entire clans were found to have vanished, erased from records, their names forgotten save for a single scrap of song or a cracked family stone. Some returned from off-world to find their ancestral homes occupied by strangers, or demolished to make way for temporary imperial housing. Others bore trauma too deep to re-enter communal life, war veterans who had seen too much, who no longer remembered how to sit in silence without flinching. There were disputes over property, over inheritance, over who had the right to speak for a people fractured by time and tyranny. Reconciliation efforts began, truth councils, storytelling nights, reparation circles, but they were fragile, dependent on good faith and exhausted hearts. The New Republic, despite its slow machinery, provided funding for some of this. Aid stations were established, starports refurbished, and cultural centers constructed with architectural nods to Twi'lek cave design. But the most vital work happened beyond Republic eyes. In the Twilight, in the subterranean sanctuaries, in the wind-worn silence between clans, Ryloth redefined itself not as a victim of history, but as a survivor. The children born in this new era were taught not just the language of rebellion, but of repair. They were taught to listen to stone, to read the wind, to sing with their Lekku. They were taught that freedom is not a gift, but a responsibility. And so Ryloth rebuilt, not quickly, not cleanly, but with a kind of stubborn grace that has always defined its people. Where tunnels collapsed, new ones were dug. Where names were forgotten, new songs were written to remember them. Where temples were burned, the soot was used as ink for the next generation's stories. There was no grand reconstruction. There was no utopia. There was only breath, rhythm, and stone. And from these, the Twi'leks forged a new dawn, not from the light of distant stars, but from the fire they carried within. Chapter 10, The Spirit of Ryloth. The wind never stops on Ryloth. It does not rush or scream as it once did in the darker chapters, nor does it whisper with fear as it did when shadows clung to every corner of the Twilight Belt. Now it moves with the slow cadence of memory, a breath drawn from stone and shadow, carrying with it the voices of ancestors and the scent of rebirth. It curls through the ancient caverns, gliding over the stone dwellings of Canon and Lekku, through reopened sanctuaries, between the Lekku of dancing children and elders seated in the dust with eyes turned skyward. The wind is the spirit of Ryloth. It carries no flag, no proclamation, no doctrine. It simply moves, just as the Twi'lek people have always done, through silence, survival, and song. Ryloth is not a planet easily understood by those who arrive from distant stars. Its surface is too extreme, its culture too quiet, its wounds too deeply etched into its bones. But for the Twi'leks, this world is more than soil or sky. It is the beginning of every name, the meaning behind every gesture, the rhythm beneath every heartbeat. It has burned them and nourished them, buried them and cradled them. And still they remain. No matter the era, slavery, war, exile, or freedom, there has always been a voice in the twilight. Sometimes it trembles, sometimes it sings, but it never disappears. There are stories still told in the low caverns, where firelight flickers against walls painted with the ochre of dreams. Stories not recorded in Republic archives or hollow scrolls, but passed from breath to breath, Lekku to Lekku, held in the sacred stillness between words. One such story is of Ashley, the flame walker, who wandered the narrow path between the bright lands and the wastes, her feet leaving no mark on the stone, her voice calling lost spirits home. She wore no crown, carried no blade, but wherever she went, clans set down their quarrels and opened their granaries to one another. It is said her Lekku never stopped moving, even in sleep, always listening to the breath of the world. Some say she was a myth. Others say she was a woman who chose to become a myth, so her people would never forget how to find each other in the dark. There is the story of three brothers who, trapped in a cave-in, carved their songs into the walls with their fingernails, knowing they would never be found. Generations later, their tunnel was uncovered, and the carvings still sang, vibrating softly when the wind passed through them just so. The elders say it was not merely air but memory made physical, echoing the names of those who refused to vanish. There are stories of the windless child, born during a season when even the currents dared not stir, who spoke only in movement and became the first dancer of the clan Narvel. Her rituals returned the breath to the earth. Her gestures became prayers, and her silence became sacred. These are not tales of conquest. They are not legends of warriors slaying beasts or generals toppling empires. They are quiet, resilient things, like moss growing in the cracks of a stone, like fingers tracing forgotten runes, like the slow mending of a frayed robe. The Twi'lek people do not define greatness through power, but through the ability to endure with grace, to speak when others silence you, to remember when others erase you, to remain soft, even in a world that has tried again and again to make you hard. This too is resistance. In recent years, new stories have begun to form, not just of survival but of becoming. Of Twi'lek pilots flying refugee routes across the rim, not as cargo but as captains. Of artists projecting Lekku shadow dances across the skylines of Coruscant, turning ancient movement into protest, into poetry. Of engineers coding in Twi'leki syntax, writing algorithms that listen for music in planetary weather patterns. Of children who trace the clan marks on their grandparents' necks and ask not who they are, but what they can build next. These stories do not replace the old. They grow from them, like roots threading through stone. A clan in Ruhak now teaches memory weaving, where young Twi'leks bind threads soaked in spices to tell their family stories without words. Each color, each texture, each knot signifies a truth, some joyous, some painful, all necessary. When the weaving is complete, it is worn around the Lekku during ceremonies, not to show pride, but to share burden. A teacher in Nabet has created a school for off-world-born Twi'leks, teaching them not just language, but cadence, the rhythm of the land, the breath patterns of sacred chants, the meaning of shadowplay and courtship and mourning. And on the cliffs outside Canon, a new generation of elders gathers to watch the wind and chart the coming season, not with instruments, but by listening to how the air speaks against the old stones. They are not waiting for prophecy. They are listening for harmony. What the galaxy often fails to grasp is that Ryloth is not merely a place. It is a state of being. It lives in those who have never touched its soil, in those who carry its dust in their eyes and its silence in their bones. It is not defined by its geography, its government, or its wounds. It is defined by its spirit, a spirit that cannot be mapped, colonized, or silenced. It is found in every act of gentle defiance, in every Lekku wrapped in morning silk, in every hand reaching out to help another across the chasm of the past. The Twi'lek influence on the galaxy is not always visible in the ways historians prefer to record. They did not build fleets to rival the core, nor did they write the founding charters of great governments. But they shaped culture, emotion, and memory in ways that cannot be measured. Their songs are carried on trade routes, their stories whispered in the corners of rebel camps, their movements studied by diplomats who wish they could speak without saying anything at all. In the Jedi Order, in the halls of academia, in the underbellies of pirate vessels and the heart of resistance cells, the Twi'lek legacy pulses, quiet, steady, unbroken. Ryloth still bears scars. The minds may be sealed, but the memories remain. The caves may echo with laughter again, but the ghosts still walk their paths. Freedom is not the absence of chains, but the choice to remember who you were when you wore them. And the Twi'leks have chosen to remember. They have made their pain into ritual, their silence into language, their exile into connection. They have taught the galaxy that strength is not in the loudest voice, but in the one that sings even when no one is listening. In the end, the Spirit of Ryloth is not something that can be explained. It must be felt, in the weight of a silence shared between two people who have suffered the same loss. In the tilt of a dancer's head as they bow to the wind. In the pause before a story is told, when the room grows still and everyone waits, knowing that what comes next will carry them somewhere sacred. It lives in the darkness between stars, in the breath between verses, in the movement of a single tale in a crowded room. It is the promise that no matter what has been taken, something remains. Something always remains. And so the Twi'leks walk forward, not forgetting what came before, but carrying it with them. Not looking to be redeemed, but to be seen. Not seeking to conquer the galaxy, but to remind it that beauty, resilience, and truth can grow even in the harshest soil. That a people bound by wind and stone, by breath and shadow, can endure anything and still rise. The wind never stops on Ryloth. It sings, and the people who listen, truly listen, will find in its song not just a history, but a future.